Macaulay Culkin recovered from the tour the other day, which I think the car was actually finding too slow because they couldn't get the cooling that it needed, could it? Abarth was the brainchild of Karl Abarth, who became Carlo Abarth when he moved from his native Austria to work in Italy for the Cisitalia company in the late 1940s. Cisitalia went under, it went into administration, but Karl Abarth used those as the basis to make his first Abarth, the first car with his own name on it, with the typical scorpion badge which characterizes the brand, the car with the sting in its tail. Now, this particular car was bodied by Ghia, which was best known for very flamboyant Italian cars, often destined for the American market. And if you look at the styling of this car, you can see how there was this fascination at the time with bulbous, wonderful, streamlined coachwork, screaming speed and power. But if you think that it was actually as expensive as a V12 Ferrari, it's no great surprise that Mr. Abarth did not sell very many of them. But it remains a testament to the euphoric enthusiasm cars into the nascent American sports car market. And the driver raced in the Indianapolis 500 several years ago, presumably with a little bit more horsepower until 5 Sport. Based on Fiat mechanicals, of course, a little bit like Porsche did, using Volkswagen mechanicals at exactly the same time. It was the 1953 Turin show car, by the way. These wonderful Italian cars from the early post-war era that were so popular both here in Italy and the smaller classes of racing, but also in the States. The Siata is a company that was founded in 1926 in Turin, Società Italiana Autotrasformazioni e Accessori, which loosely translates as Italian Company for the Set. They were companies very much like Abarth and some of their other peers, Ermini for example, Stanguellini, that specialized in making affordable sports cars. They competed in the 750cc classes, 1100, 1500, and so forth. And as I said before, they were very popular in America. This particular car was bought by a US journalist who raced it for 3 years. It's the sort of car that you could buy as a relatively humble journalist, take out at the weekends onto an airfield where a lot of the race 11 times. So a very, very successful little car. Thank you very much. I saw this on the tour the other day and it looked like a ton of fun. Thank you. Look at the styling of it. It's very much a baby Ferrari. You will be needing that umbrella. Right, if we can have the next car a little bit further forwards, please. Watch out, gentlemen. 1958. Now this was very much the top of the Fiat range, and if you look at the styling of this car with this panoramic windscreen and an abundance of chromed hubcaps, white wall tires, great big chrome grille, not entirely dissimilar to the Maserati that we just saw, you can tell that this was a car which was destined not only for the Italian market, but also for the American market. And Max Hoffman, who many of you will have heard of, was the American importer for brands such as BMW, Porsche, the Dolce Vita on a budget. If you had a little bit more money, you might have bought a Lancia Aurelia. If you had even more, a BMW 507. But if you wanted style with affordability, this was a great way to go. Thank you very much, Theodore Hendricks. Good to see you this afternoon, and we'll catch up again tomorrow. Thank you. You go right ahead. There's always just one more photograph. I've never heard a photographer say, no, that's fine, I don't need any more photographs. Thank you very much. Now, this is one of my favorite cars this year. The PR spiel at the time said, "This beach car has been made in small numbers for customers staying in Hotel de Grand Luxe in various parts of the world." Now, I have to say, Birmingham is not normally a place associated with the Dolce Vita, but that, of course, is where this car was made, at the Mini factory in Longbridge. And this, as you've probably guessed, with its wickerwork seats and its absence of any doors or indeed windows, is Birmingham's answer to the Fiat Jolly. Now, this was the prototype of just 14 of these cars that were built. And when it was at the Austin factory in Longbridge, it was driven by all kinds of luminaries, including the famous road tester John Bolster, the man with the great whiskers and a deerstalker cap. It was even tested by Ferrari Formula One driver Wolfgang von Trips, although we don't know whether he was impressed by the performance or not. It was eventually sold to Greece, where it's been for the rest of its life, to one Basil Mavrolian, another Greek shipping tycoon, and he kept it as a tender to his yacht Radiant II, as it was called. When the yacht was sold in the early 1970s, the car was given to the skipper. When the skipper died, his widow kept the car, and when she died, the car ended up in a scrapyard in Athens. And that is where John Raimondos discovered it in, I believe, 2010, and you have since restored it. But I have to say, this to me is exactly the sort of car that we should be highlighting at Villa d'Este, because the sort of person who would have stayed at Villa d'Este in the 50s and 60s is exactly the sort of person who would have commissioned a car like this for his leisure. It's the sort of car that says about its owner, "I have so many others that I can afford to have this as well." Thank you very much. Love it. Thank you. Now, talk about love affairs. The next car that you're going to see, which was flown here all the way from Japan, and I did ask him, was it small enough to fit in your hand luggage, is owned by the same man who bought it new in 1964. It's a 55-year love affair, all the way from Japan, Shiro Kosaka with the Abarth Monomille GT. Let's give him a round of applause. I have to say, Shiro, good afternoon, and welcome, welcome. It's good to see you. Shiro he started out as a graphic designer. He later became a very successful architect, and he is known as Mr. Abarth because his collection numbers no fewer than 49 Abarths. It's just as well that they're small. He was a young student back in the early 1960s, and he was successful enough as a graphic designer soon afterwards to be able to afford one of the first, or one of the only Ford Thunderbirds in Japan. That was followed by a little Alfa Romeo Giulia, but then the Abarth agent came visiting in 1964. He saw pictures of the car. He'd never seen a real one. There was only one other Abarth in the whole of Japan. He fell in love with it. He bought it. He has driven 60,000 kilometers in it, and he has kept it for the entire 55 years ever since. It really has been a lifelong love affair which continues, and I'm sure will go on for many more years. But it's an incredibly rare car. There are 6 of these cars in the world. They printed the brochure in a variety of languages. That's optimism for you. And Shiro owns 2 of those 6 cars. Shiro, thank you very much. I'm gonna let you go, but as always, wonderful to see you. Ciao. Shiro Kosaka with the Abarth Monomille. It almost looks like a baby Ferrari, doesn't it? Wonderful. of Greece once again, represented by the irrepressible Alex Vazeos. Good afternoon and welcome, Alex. Come a little bit further, if you would, please. Don't be shy, it's not in your nature. All the way from Greece, Alex Vazeos with the Seat Nardi 750 GT of 1964. Now look at this badge. Nardi Espagnola on the bonnet of the car. Now, there's a story to this car. There's a story to all of the cars here today. Seat started building Fiats under license in Spain after the war in order to escape the punitive import taxes that the Spanish government at the time imposed on foreign cars. Enrico Nardi, one of Enzo Ferrari's first collaborators, and a name that I'm sure you'll recognize from the famous Nardi steering wheels, also sold his products in Spain. One of his clients, a very wealthy Spanish enthusiast, suggested to him that they could start making sporty Seats built under license in Spain and known as Seat Nardis. I love this particular car because the styling of it, you can barely tell which end is the front or the rear and where the engine is in the car. But rather like the previous Abarth that we saw, they expected to make lots of them, and of course in the end it didn't quite work out that way. Only 16 were built. This was the last of those 16 cars, and it is today the sole survivor of those 16. Giovanni Michelotti styled it, and I believe that Edgardo Michelotti, the famous designer's son, is in the passenger seat. So the original designer's son in the passenger seat. Complimenti. Che emozione fa essere nella macchina che suo padre ha disegnato tantissimi anni fa?
Dopo tanti anni non mi era mai successo, la prima volta che mi capita, è un'emozione che in inglese si dice amazing.
Penso che suo padre sarebbe fiero e penso anche che abbia fatto un lavoro eccezionale. Lui era uno dei designer più importanti del dopoguerra di qualsiasi paese, quindi avere lei riunito con questa macchina oggi a Venezia ci fa veramente piacere. Grazie signor Michelotti.
Grazie a voi, sicuramente mio padre da lassù che ci guarda.
Spero che possa migliorare anche al tempo allora.
Devo chiedergli eventualmente un aiutino.
Ingegnere, per favore, la preghiamo. Era solo signore. Grazie, allora signor Michelotti, per favore, sole domani.
Grazie mille.
Grazie a lei, grazie. E grazie Alex. Thank you very much to both of you. The original designer's son in the passenger seat. Followed by Class D, a new dawn into the rock and roll era. The Ferrari 342 America, entered by Susan and Derris Garrity from, appropriately, the US of A. Good afternoon, Dennis. Good to see you here and good to see the Ferrari 342 America. Now, as the name suggests, this was a car built very much with the wealthy state-type market in mind. When this Ferrari was built in 1952, the company was still relatively unknown outside of its native Italy. They built racing cars, but they built very, very few road cars. And you had to be something of a connoisseur, and a wealthy connoisseur at that, to actually know what a Ferrari was. This particular car was, as you can see, relatively big. We'll see some of the other Ferraris from the period afterwards. They're much more compact than this, brutish, and very, very expensive. Just 6 of these cars were built. This was the only one with this particular body style by Vignale, where incidentally Michelotti was also a prolific designer. Enzo Ferrari would say at the time, when customers might complain that his cars were relatively primitive in terms of handling, the way they stopped, the way they went around corners, he'd say, don't complain, you're paying for the engine. The rest I'm giving you for free. A bit like Mr. Bugatti's answer to people that said his cars didn't break. He said, I make them to go, not to stop. Great looking car, beautifully restored in its original colour. If you get a chance when this car comes by, take a look inside at the dashboard. The attention to detail when these cars were still very much hand-built and custom-built, is quite extraordinary. What they could do in 1950s Italy in terms of craftsmanship, of artisanal skill, is something that we should really celebrate and keep for future generations of restorers, so that cars like this can continue to be admired by us all in days to come. Thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure. The Ferrari 342 America of Susan and Dennis Garrity. I'll pretend that I haven't seen it being hot wired. Now, I'm sure you all know what a Jaguar XK120 is, but this isn't like most XK120s that you have seen before. Most customers would have been perfectly happy with the 120 mile-an-hour Jaguar back in the late 1940s. But one person who was not was Monsieur Malpelli from Lyon in France. And Monsieur Malpelli ordered not one but two of these XK120s with special gear coachwork from the Torinese coach builder, one red and one blue. The car was shown at the Paris and Milan motor shows in 1954, whereupon Monsieur Malpelli promptly disappeared. We don't know whether he paid for the car or not, but he did a runner, and let's let him get the photographs. Mr. Malpelli disappeared, so the French importer who had ordered these cars for him promptly took the car back and kept it until 1969. It was later sold to a well-known French collector called Roland Urban. He, in fact, was a stuntman. It's a pretty cool occupation as car collectors go, and he'll good to see you. And Monsieur Urban kept the car for a number of years. In fact, it had only done 9,000 kilometers in 1994, which tells you that it was very much meant to be a car for concours d'élégance and for shows, rather than a car for racing around as you might normally in a Jaguar XK120. But the styling of this car, as the name suggests, supersonica, does not suggest something slow. Good afternoon, Kathy and Bill Heineke, all the way from Thailand. As exotic destinations for entrants go, that ranks pretty high up there. Look at the styling, it's very much inspired by jet plane styling of the 1950s. Look at these exhausts which mimic the air exit for a jet engine. 4 exhausts, fantastic lights, the French F on the back illuminated, the sides. This is a body you may have seen on a Fiat 8V before, but only 3 were made on the Jaguar chassis. It has to be one of the most spectacular cars of the early to mid 1950s, freshly restored and making its show debut here at Villa d'Este. Great to have you here. It could be the Paris show in 1954, except for the weather. Now this is the Seat 208S, entered by our friend Jan Dereux, all the way from Belgium. This is the bigger sister of the little red Seat that we had seen before. Now, Seat, as we said earlier, both based their cars on Fiat designs, but tuned, upgraded, improved, faster, sexier, and considerably more expensive. The earlier car that we saw had the little Fiat 4-cylinder engine. This, on the other hand, received the V8 that Fiat had reserved for its flagship model. Now look at some of the details on this as well. The external filler, every boy racer's dream. 2 litre, just to tell your friends what you had under the hood. And unsurprisingly, it went to America. It in fact was sold to an LA filmmaker called Kent Wakefield, who fitted a Cobra V8 and drove the car with that engine for a number of years. It ended up on the forecourt of a Porsche dealership in the mid-1970s, and a young architect bought it and kept it for the rest of his life. After that, it passed to Jan, who located the original engine 50 years after it had been taken out, refitted it, and had the car completely restored, and it was finished when, Jan?
Last month.
Last month. Nothing like cutting it to the wire, but there are some cars that were finished last night, so you're actually very well prepared. I have to say, I love this. You've still got the Seata badge on the dashboard. The Seata car company is happy to welcome you amongst its enthusiastic clients, and in order to make sure to obtain a perfect performance on this sports car, request that the first 1,500 miles do not exceed 3,800 RPM. I hope you're paying attention to that. Jan, thank you very much. Jan de Roo, the Seata 208. As you can see, it was built for warm, dry weather, not today. Now, in the mid-1950s, if you could afford it and wanted the fastest car that money could buy, this was one of the cars that was likely to be high up on your list. The Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Matthias Wonkovitz from Germany has entered the ex-UK press car PLB23. This is a very special 300 SL. It's not just a normal 300 SL road car, it's actually the very car with which Stirling Moss and Dennis Jenkinson recceed the route of their 1955 Mille victory. It's the car, therefore, that they used for their practice runs on that epic 1,000-mile race around Italy, which they did in just over 10 hours to achieve an average speed, if you can believe it, of 99.9 miles an hour. This is the car that they used the month before for their practice, and in fact, before that, it had already starred on the London Motor Show stand back in October 1954. If I can read from Dennis Jenkinson's report of the show, he said, next door to Jaguar, I should add that he didn't like expensive cars, next door to Jaguar and displayed in a rather exaggerated manner was a 300 SL Mercedes Coupe fitted with fuel injection as standard and available in France for £5,000. You have to understand that, first of all, £5,000 would have bought you a very nice house in the centre of London at the time, and also fuel injection was something which only aircraft had. No cars at the time had fuel injection. It was the fastest car you could buy. It was claimed to do 150 miles an hour. The only slight problem that a few owners later found was if you turned it over, getting out with gull-wing doors was somewhat problematic. But I have to say, they remain even today, 60 years later, good afternoon, amongst the most modern and comfortable 1950s cars that one can buy. I remember a great story when this car was tested by a British magazine. They decided to drive it from John O'Groats all the way to Land's End. And they realized that they were going to be late at the hotel where they had booked dinner. So they called ahead and they said, we're a couple of 100 miles away, can you please keep the kitchen open for us? And the lady, 1950s Britain, she wasn't very happy to eat later than 7 o'clock. The lady said, well, yes, okay, we'll make an exception and prepare some food for you. They put their foot down, they made it to the hotel, they knocked on the door and asked, they said, well, can we have some food? And the lady said, no, I'm sorry, I'm waiting for a couple of people who called from 200 miles away, but they won't be here for at least another 2 hours. So that gives you an idea of how the performance of this car seemed like something from another world in the mid-1950s. Thank you very much. Great to see the ex-Jenks and Moss Mille practice car here at Villa d'Este in 2019. On their way up to Scotland, by the way, they were served at a Scottish petrol station by a young petrol attendant whose name was Jackie Stewart. The 1955 Alfa Romeo 1900 Super Sprint La Flèche from the Lopresto family. Duccio, ciao e buongiorno. Great to see you. Ralph awarding the participants medal. Now, La Flèche, why is it called La Flèche? It's called La Flèche, which means, as I'm sure you know, the arrow, because of its chrome mouldings on the side and the coachwork mouldings, which give this impression of speed and how can I say, geometrical. Everything is pushed forwards. It implies that even at standstill, this car is doing 100 miles an hour. If you look at details like the door handles, the mouldings, these mock air intakes, the panoramic windscreen, and if you get a chance, look at the interior of this car, because it is perfectly preserved, despite being almost, in fact, over 60 years old. This was the original colour, and it was built for the 1955 Turin show. The stylist of this car was none other than Giovanni Michelotti, the same man who styled the Seat Nardi that we saw come pass by earlier. And he really was one of Italy's most prolific car designers in the 1950s. At one show alone, no fewer than 50 cars at the show had been styled by Mr. Michelotti. That's just how influential his work was in that period. Now, this particular car, after its show history, disappeared off the radar. It was sold to a ship owner in Trieste, the owner of a shipyard. After that, it ended up in Rome. It featured in a series of B-movies in the 1980s, and then it completely disappeared. But Corrado Lopresto, Duccio's father, always loved cars. He came across a magazine article of this car from the 1980s. He tracked down the photographer who was still alive. He asked the photographer if he remembered who had owned the car, and he said, I can't remember. All I can remember is that he was a pharmacist in Forlì. So Corrado called every single pharmacist in Forlì until one of them answered and said, yes, I do own an Alfa Romeo La Flèche, and thereupon the negotiations started. Corrado were able to buy the car. They have restored it completely, and it's making its show debut here at Villa d'Este today. Complimenti Duccio, è stupenda. La Flèche from the Lopresto collection. La Freccia. (1955), so the same year, but rather than Milan, we're down in Modena for the Ferrari 250 GT Competizione. Now, the designer of this car, who is very much still with us, was let's say an underappreciated designer called Mr. Aldo Romarone, who can claim ownership of some of the greatest designs of the post-war period. He started out with Cisitalia in the 1950s. When Cisitalia went bust, he took his designs with him to Pininfarina, where he was credited with the Maserati A6 GCS Pininfarina Berlinetta. He followed that with this, and many other cars afterwards, including the 375 Rossellini car, which is obviously famous, the Ferrari Superfast, the Alfa Romeo Duetto, and even the Ferrari Dino. But this was one of his early and seminal works, and what I want you to look at on this particular car is the tail end treatment, because with these flying buttresses, he started a trend that would continue right the way through to the Ferrari Dino and the Ferrari 308 and so many other cars that are familiar to all of us. But this was a design exercise on a competition car chassis. The colour, I'm sure many of you will recognise, it later became popularised and is even offered now by Ferrari as grigio Ingrid. But this at the time was the perfect example of show car aesthetics on a race car chassis. And of course you can hear the V12 3-litre Colombo, which was the staple of Ferrari production right through until the 1960s and was one of the winningest racing engines of all time in GT cars. It's entered by, and I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, Sunil Rekmeratane. You're giving me the thumbs up rather than a punch, so I'm assuming I've got it right. Thank you very much. I have to say, I love the car. Beautifully restored. For many, many years it was red and missing its bumpers. You've done a great job of getting it back to exactly the way that it was back in 1955. Thank you very much and congratulations. Great looking car. We love it. Now, back in the mid-1950s, the flagship of BMW production was this car, the BMW 507, shown here today by the May collection. And I admired it the other day on the tour, and it looked like it was performing very, very well. If you can imagine a company that has a two-model strategy, one of them is a micro car, the other one is a $10,000 supercar. It will not surprise you if I tell you that BMW lost money on every single one of the 248 of these cars that they built. The other thing that's unusual about this particular car is its colour. Back in the 1950s, especially in its native Germany, black was considered a colour that you only ordered for taxis, not for sports cars, which explains why only 3 of these cars were originally ordered in black. But this particular car has a very special history because it was owned new by Peter Böhnisch, who was one of the most flamboyant and charismatic men of the PR world at the time. And he even went on to be Helmut Kohl's personal spokesman. And this was a very well-known car in late 1950s Germany. You would have seen it at ski resorts, you would have seen it at the smart resorts on the northern coast. He lived in Hamburg, and it seems the absolute perfect car for a dashing man around town in late 1950s Germany. I have to say, black, it may look good on taxis, but it looks a damn sight better on this. Thank you very much. One of my favourite cars today, and it was an absolute pleasure to drive behind it on the tour, hearing that wonderful V8 engine. It's almost like following a Riva speedboat. Thank you. Just listen to that as it goes by. That tells you that he's on his way to a very important PR meeting somewhere. Make way, Mr. Collins waiting. Class E, the swinging 60s and the sky is the limit. Come a little bit further forward, William, if you would. William Loughran with the Ferrari 250 GT short wheelbase Berlinetta. As you can see, not all Ferraris are red, and thankfully so. This was the last dual-purpose Ferrari road and race car. It's a car that you could, in theory, drive to the office during the week, as long as you live somewhere without too many neighbours, and then race at the weekend. And the sort of person that would buy this was typically a gentleman driver. And indeed, the first owner of this car was a Yorkshireman, a 38-year-old Yorkshireman called Graham Whitehead. And he and his half-brother Peter were very successful amateur drivers. They came second at Le Mans in Aston Martin in 1958. Sadly, Peter was killed shortly afterwards on the Tour de France, but Graham kept on racing, and for 1960, he decided to switch to Ferrari, and this is the car that he decided would be his weapon of choice for that season. He raced it extensively all over England and even as far afield as Angola, believe it or not. He even raced it in the 1960 Tourist Trophy at Goodwood against Sterling Moss, who of course won the race in the sister car to this, with the radio turned on, listening to the race commentary courtesy of the BBC, which told him how far behind the second car was. This particular car led a relatively quiet life after that for many, many years. It became a historic race car in the 1980s. In fact, I believe that the owner's son from those days, I saw his head over the crowd somewhere here this afternoon. I had invited him back to see his father's old car. And I have to say, on a personal note, this was the first expensive car that I ever sold in the classic car business, and the car that I took my wife on her first date in. Needless to say, it was not mine. And I'm not entirely sure that the owner knew that it was being used for that purpose either. But that's another story. William, who has been involved with old cars, you won't mind me saying, for over 50 years, bought the car 9 years ago, sent it to Ferrari Classiche for open wallet surgery, and got the car back in absolutely immaculate condition as you see it here today. One of the best looking Ferraris of all time, and to me the best driving Ferrari. I can still remember the Cortina driver flashing me the other way, telling me I was overtaking dangerously. I'm very jealous. Thank you. Ferrari 250 short wheelbase. And now, just as not all Ferraris are red, not all Aston Martins are green. This was Aston Martin's answer to the Ferrari 250 short wheelbase. A British brute in an Italian suit. The short wheelbase is almost common in comparison. Just 19 of these cars were built in the early 1960s. It's the DB4 GT Zagato, the English Aston Martin clothed by the famous carrozziere from Milan. And if you think that it's because of an intentional marketing ploy that they only made 19, that's not the case. 19 was all they could sell in those days. It seems amazing now, all these years later, but the last of these cars actually had to be discounted by Aston Martin to £3,000 to sell them. That's how difficult it was to sell very expensive sports cars back in the early 1960s, when nobody had any clue that one day people would actually want to collect them. But the great strength of this car was the fact that it had Aston Martin power with this beautiful, lightweight Italian coachwork. The bumps in the bonnet are this way in order to clear the relatively tall Aston Martin engine. The Perspex covers to make the car more aerodynamic. This particular car was shown at the 1961 Geneva show, and the buyer there was a young Swiss enthusiast who managed to get enough money together to ask the importer Hubert Pathé to sell him the car. And he barely had a driving license. The first thing he did after buying the car was to enroll on a sports driving course. And the next thing he did with it was to take it to the Spa circuit in Belgium, where he actually raced it against the works teams. He even had the Aston Martin factory slightly flare the rear arches to fit wider tyres. He kept the car only for about a year or so, and the next owner was even more improbable, because it was the chief of the traffic police in Bern in Switzerland. You can imagine driving around in a red Aston Martin Zagato. After that, he went to the States. It led a very, very cosseted life, completely unrestored, in one man's hands for the next 40 years. And it's now back in Europe, back in Switzerland, leading a cosseted life once again, and still unrestored to this day, almost 60 years later. Tim, a pleasure as always, the Desteriero collection with the DB4 GT Zagato Aston Martin.
Fidati per una volta, dilli. Oh.
Has there ever been a better looking Aston Martin? I'll let you decide. The movie stars car. Welcome, Tony and Chris Vasilopoulos from Johannesburg via London, and today making its restoration debut here at Villa d'Este, the Ferrari 250 GT California Spider. Let's give them a round of applause, please. I've asked him to switch it off because I know time is pressing, but there's a really great story behind this car, so bear with me. A friend of mine who produces movies tells me that every good movie has the same formula. It starts with bliss for the main participant, it descends into adversity when something terrible happens to them, and then it ends with redemption for the hero. And that's pretty much the sequence of every movie. And this car could also in itself have a movie written about it, because the first time the public saw this car was at the 1961 Paris Motor Show, where it looked exactly as you see it here today, hence the yellow headlights as well. After that, it was sold, and 2 years later, it was acquired second-hand by none other than Monsieur Alain Delon. Monsieur Delon was frequently photographed with this car with a variety of starlets in the passenger seat, ranging from Shirley MacLaine to Jane Fonda and many other lucky occupants. He kept it for a couple of years, and then eventually, in about 1971, it was sold, and this is a fate that happens to so many old cars, long before the days of collecting cars. It was sold to a man in a relatively unknown and unglamorous part of France who had a transport company. He was a trucking entrepreneur. He liked buying cars, he did not like selling them, which meant that he very soon ran out of space. And his cars were kept mostly outside in the garden. Now that fate was not reserved to this Ferrari. The California Spider was lucky enough to be kept in a shed. And in that shed it sat for years and years and years. And eventually he ran out of space in the house as well, which meant that his magazine collection, don't worry, they're only car magazines, his magazine collection was stored on top of the car. 1, 2, 3, 4, on the boot initially until that collapsed, and then on the roof, and then on the bonnet, until after 40 years, the entire car was submerged in car magazines. Fast forward, and the owner died. His children knew that he had a Ferrari somewhere, but they weren't quite sure where. Eventually, in 2014, they decided that it was probably time to clear up the garden a little bit, and they called a French auction house. And they told the French auction house, and in fact one of the auctioneers are here today, good afternoon Mathieu and Pierre. They called the auction house and they said, we've got some old cars, and by the way there's a Ferrari California amongst them. And Mathieu is a very old colleague of mine, and a very accomplished opera singer by the way. Do not start now. Mathieu said, yes, of course you do, of course you have a California Spider, but yes, all right, I'll try and find some time in my diary to come and see you. Anyway, the next day they were there, and they saw all these extraordinary relics in the garden, decaying, magnificently decaying, Talbot, Largos, Delahaye's, all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And then they went to the garage where the Ferrari was supposed to be, and all they saw was a pile of car magazines. Anyway, patiently they took one out after another, and there and behold, underneath all the car magazines, was a car that most of the world didn't even know existed, because it was incorrectly listed in Ferrari's records as a coupe, and nobody knew that it had ever been built. But there it was, the actual car that Alain Delon had driven 50 years earlier, and that had been sitting in the barn since 2011. Mathieu and his team auctioned the car, along with all the others. I think there were about 2,000 people in that auction, mostly waiting to see what happened. I was actually instructed to go along and bid on the car, and I put my hand up and about what felt like 100 TV cameras were suddenly on me. You'd never get that in an English auction or a German one. And the hammer went down, and the people who are sitting in the car now, who were listening and giving me instructions on the telephone from back home in South Africa, I heard lots of high-fiving and cheering. The whole family erupted, and the car was yours. And over the last 4 years, you have, thanks to Paul Russell, who is standing behind the car now with his phone, I mean, it's an emotional journey. You have restored the car completely to the way that it was, rather better than when Alain Delon had it. And I'll always remember that when we pushed it out of the storage and opened up the boot, what did we find inside but Alain Delon's musty espadrilles, which you still have as part of the car's history. Congratulations, it's been a hell of a journey, and it's an honor to have the car here for its post-restoration debut. Thank you. Or should I say, merci. The Alain Delon Ferrari 250 GT short wheelbase California Spider. From the barn to Villa d'Este. Paul, well done. And now all the way from Kuwait, where I doubt they have the same weather as here, Rezam Al-Rumi's Aston Martin DBSC. Good afternoon and welcome to Villa d'Este. Do come a little bit further forwards, please. Keep coming, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, by the mid-1960s, the Aston Martin family of DB4s and DB5s and DB6s were starting to look a little bit tired and out of date compared to some of the Italian and American competition. So David Brown, the owner of Aston Martin, put out a tender. He put out word that he would like to see some ideas for a new Aston Martin from the world's leading coach builders. And at the time, Touring of Milan, who had styled the original DB4 10 plus years earlier, submitted their suggestion, and we have the head of Touring here with us this afternoon. Nice to see you. They put forward their suggestion for what they thought the next Aston Martin could look like. This is that car, but sadly, before Aston Martin could make a decision, Touring went into administration, and that was the end of car production at Touring for many, many years to come. So the two cars that were built remained, if you like, as orphans for many, many years, until this car in particular, the left-hand drive one, it was also a right-hand drive car, was acquired by the collection of Simon Draper, possibly the world's best-known Aston Martin collector, and latterly by its Kuwaiti owner, who is also involved with Aston Martin as an ongoing business today. It's a very, very quirky, unusual design. There are elements of the Lamborghini 350 Flying Star that you will see here, also done by Touring, and yet at the same time you still have these relatively old-fashioned wire wheels which hark back to a much earlier age. In the end, Aston Martin decided to go with their own design, and this car remains one of two what-ifs. But it's exactly the sort of car that we like to see here at Villa d'Este that you probably would not see anywhere else in the world. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to have you here with us today. Now the same period, but looking very much more old school, much more classical, the Ferrari 275 GTB4 of Charles and Tara Wegner, all the way from California. Good afternoon. Doesn't that color look fantastic, ladies and gentlemen? Absolutely stunning. As I said before, not all Ferraris are red, and I dare say the best ones aren't. It's amazing to think that when this model came out at the 1964 Paris show, it got a lukewarm reception. A lot of motoring journalists at the time said, but surely shouldn't the engine be going behind the driver now rather than in front? This is old-fashioned practice. The car's styling, as many of you will recognize, harked back to the 250 GTO that had been successful just 1 or 2 years before. And yet, of course, as is often the case, you need perspective to judge the aesthetics of this car. And today, in 2019, good to see Italian Electrics work with the wipers still going. In 2019, this, to most people, is the epitome of what a Ferrari should look like. This long, almost phallic nose, low cockpit, short tail, that is Ferrari design at its absolutely most classical and successful. And of course the colour, not sure, the hazelnut, as anybody who's had an Italian ice cream before will recognise, is to me what absolutely makes the car. This particular car was sold new to a very flamboyant American. His name was Bill Harrah. He owned the Harrah's Casinos. He had the world's largest collection of cars, about 1,000 cars. Possibly, in my opinion, also the world's largest collection of very loud check jackets, if you've ever seen a photograph of him. And he used this car extensively. In fact, he kept it all the way through until 1973. He was also, incidentally, the Ferrari dealer for Reno, Nevada. But to me, colours are such an important part of the car, and especially original colours. I think we should make a conscientious effort to try and preserve cars in the colour that they were first built. You don't buy a beautiful painting and think, oh, I like those flowers better in blue than yellow, so why would you do the same thing with a car? Thank you. Chuck and Tara right now, good to see you. Apologies for the weather. We promised Californian weather tomorrow. And now we have the musicians' cars class, kicked off appropriately by the Bizzarini GT Strada of Frank Gelf from Germany. Good afternoon, Frank, and welcome to Villa d'Este. Christoph Schmidt in the passenger seat, who helped supervise the restoration. Now this is a class where we wanted to celebrate the relationship between musicians, whether they're composers, whether they're singers, whether they're conductors, and the motor car. Most musicians appreciate a certain amount of flamboyance, and the first owner of this car was no different. His name was Little Tony, born Antonio Ciacci in San Marino, and he was known as the Italian Elvis. And Little Tony was a big car enthusiast. He had a number of supercars. In fact, this particular car even starred in a couple of his movies, Marinai in Coperta, and I think Giovanotti as well. It was a car that he enjoyed driving. He sold it after a year or so, and the next owner, believe it or not, changed the tail of the car to look like a contemporary Ferrari 250 GTO. But the Bizzarini as a model is a great example of Italian styling with American muscle, because underneath this very slippery and swoopy Italian coachwork is a stonking, great big Chevy V8 engine. Giotto Bizzarini, the creator of this car, was also the man who created or helped to create the Ferrari GTO when he was working in Maranello. After having a falling out with Ferrari, he decided to build his own car. He got backing initially from a refrigerator producer, fell out with them as well, and he created the Bizzarini road car from his base down in Tuscany. And to try and make the car handle as well as possible, he put the engine in the car as far backwards as possible. In fact, he put it so far back that if you look here, you'll see a panel in the top of the dashboard. And if you wanted to work on the engine, you didn't just take off the bonnet, you even had to take off the panel on the dashboard to get to the engine underneath. But it meant that the weight distribution of the car was very good, and these cars were very successful in contemporary racing. Great photograph here, by the way, of a very dapper looking little Tony with his Bizzarini back in the 1960s. Restoration of the car was started in 2007, and it was finished on, I believe, how long ago was the restoration finished? Tuesday. Congratulations, that was a Herculean effort. You know who not to go to if you want your car restoring in a hurry, but perfection takes time. Congratulations, thank you. Now, 52 years ago tomorrow, on the 26th of May 1967, a very famous Italian received a very beautiful car. And it's the car that you're about to see parading in front of you. The car is a Maserati Mistral Spider. Adolfo's grandfather obviously had something about winds, because all Maseratis of the time were named after a wind. And you see another loyal owner smiling broadly in the background. And there it is. Oliver Ruppertshofen from Germany with the Maserati Mistral Spider, delivered new to a man described as the greatest tenor of the 20th century, Mario del Monaco. Good afternoon and welcome. This is an unbelievably preserved car. The same verde aqua, water green paintwork that Commendator del Monaco specified in 1967 is the paint that's on the car today. So is the interior. It has covered 26,000 kilometers from new, but more remarkable than that is the fact that it covered an additional 1,200 this week driving here from Germany. And Enrico Gelpi awards it therefore the prize for the car that was driven the furthest to come here to the Concorso. Enrico Gelpi, the president of the Arci di Como, giving the award to Oliver Ruppertshofen. And I think it's definitely worth a round of applause, because cars are meant to be driven. Let's remember that. If we can to paraphrase the Nike slogan, just drive it. And it's great to see somebody enjoying their car, even a preservation car like this, in the way that it was intended. Now, Mario del Monaco was a serial buyer of beautiful cars. He owned a Ferrari California Spider. He owned a variety of other cars, despite suffering a near fatal car accident in 1964. He was married also to a very famous soprano, Rita Ferrarini, also a lover of cars. In fact, the car was registered in her name, as was popular in mid-60s Italy, when you were less likely to be investigated by the tax authorities if you were a lady rather than a man. But Mario del Monaco's car, 52 years old tomorrow, still in its original livery. And incidentally, he played Othello no fewer than 427 times during his career, which probably helped to pay for a lot of those sports cars. Oliver, thank you very much. Congratulations for driving it down. Dominic Fischlin awarding the participants prize. And if we can make way, please. The Mario de Monaco Maserati Mistral Spider, driven all the way from Germany. Thank you very much. Thank you. And keep driving it. That's what it's for. Never stop driving. Fast. Adolfo, your grandfather, I have to say, did build some rather good cars. The Lamborghini Miura from Luca Taino. Good afternoon and welcome to Villa d'Este. A little bit further. That's perfect. Now I told you he was a serial car buyer, and it's a good thing he was called Little Tony, because if he was called Big Tony, he wouldn't have fitted into a Lamborghini Miura. But this was the third Miura that he had. The first one was white, the second one was black, and then he apparently discovered color because he chose Azzurro Mexico for this car. Azzurro Mexico was given that name in 1971. It was a color that was offered in honor to celebrate the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, and obviously those were the national colors. Little Tony was always a serial buyer of sports cars. He enjoyed this for 2 years, and then it went on the normal travels that any old supercar undergoes before finally being restored back into its original color and finished.
Questa quando è che ha finito il restauro di questa macchina?
2 mesi fa.
2 mesi fa, complimenti! Devo dire è splendida, Azzurro Mexico gli sta bene. Sulla cassetta autopiste cosa c'è? Little Tony. And he's got Little Tony on the stereo. I love attention to detail. Congratulations, complimenti Luca. Little Tony, if you're looking down from above, you have very good taste in cars. Complimenti. Fantastic color. The Azzurro Mexico Lamborghini Miura S of Little Tony. Vai pure. Vai, vai. Now if I say to you 1985, Live Aid, who was one of the star participants at that great concert? None other than Sir Elton John. And this is the car that he bought at the same time as he stepped up onto that stage. The Aston Martin V8 Vantage, the Rocket Man's own rocket ship. Britain's first supercar, launched in 1977. A big V8, lots of noise, 170 miles an hour. Every Greenpeace member's nightmare. Also used, of course, by Timothy Dalton in The Living Daylights. This was a car that certainly announced its presence. Enough wood on the dashboard to populate a rainforest, enough leather inside to decimate a herd of cows. But this was England's answer to the Porsche 911 Turbo, the Ferrari Boxer, the BMW M1, and all the other pretenders to its throne. But Elton John bought this car back in '85, and he kept it for no fewer than 16 years. Royal Cherry, by the way, is the name of this colour, which I think makes a lovely change to the traditional green that you would normally see so many of these cars in. But today, seeing one of these cars, it's come into its own as a modern classic, and it's the first time that we've ever had one of these cars here at Villa d'Este. And we think that it's important to keep on evolving and reflecting younger collecting tastes. And this car is absolutely of the moment. So congratulations, Nopor Supipat from France with the Rocket Man's Aston Martin V8 Vantage. Take it away. the other Queen of England. It's hard to believe that this car is almost the same age as the Aston Martin that you've just seen come by. But it's Giovanni Innocenti with the Porsche 959 that was built new by none other than the great conductor Herbert von Karajan. Welcome and good afternoon. Buongiorno, benvenuto a Villa d'Este, Giovanni. If the V8 Vantage and all of its glitz was much more Rocket Man, then the tech fest that was the Porsche 959 was more craft work, I think I would say. Wouldn't you agree, Ralph? This car introduced so many new concepts to the motoring world. It was one of the first four-wheel drive supercars. It had even tire pressure sensors in the wheels, which nobody had heard of before. Twin turbo, 200 miles an hour. It even had a 6-speed gearbox, which at the time had not been homologated in Germany. You weren't allowed to have a 6-speed gearbox. So first gear had a G on it, which stood for Gelände, which was to tell the authorities that it wasn't actually 6-speed, it was 5-speed, and G was a first for off-road use. And by the way, there was also a button you could push that the car would raise and you could drive it, perhaps not off-road, although they were very successful on the Paris-Dakar. But can you believe Herbert von Karajan, the great Austrian conductor, who was a serial buyer of supercars? He had a 507 new, he even had a Ford GT40 that he used on the road. And then at the age of 80 years old, how many 80-year-olds do you know that go out and buy a 200-mile-an-hour supercar? But that's exactly what he did. And before passing away in, I think, 1989, if I'm not mistaken, he sold this car to another great bon vivant friend of his, none other than Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan, who was a very cool character who had lots of amazing cars, starting with a golden Mercedes when he was 18 years old at Harvard University. I said to him many years later when we had that car waiting to sell, I bet you were successful with the girls in this car, weren't you? And his answer was, I didn't need the car. This is von Karajan's 959, special order by the way, with cloth seats inside like the lightweight racing version. It's a great car to close the 1980s and the supercar fest of that decade. Great to have this type of car at Villa d'Este for the first time. Thank you. Ordered new, incidentally, in Ferrari Rosso Corsa, just to be different. Not long to go now, we're on to the racing car class, the Ferrari 166 Mille of Brian Ross. And Brian Ross looks different to the way that I remembered him, but good afternoon, Max, lovely to see you. The Ferrari 166 was Ferrari's first racing car. In fact, it was Ferrari's first car, full stop, from the days when you could race the car at the weekend and drive it on the road during the week. And again, you'll recognize this familiar badging on the bonnet, Superleggera by Touring. It's that familiar, special, lightweight construction, patented system that you saw on the Alfa Romeo earlier on from David Sudoric. It was nicknamed the Barchetta, which means in Italian, little boat, because compared to the large pre-war style cars that had gone before, this seemed entirely modern and unusual. Now this car in particular has a special association with Villa d'Este because after racing on the 1949mm, I think it was, and it came, well, we won't say it too loudly, but 34th overall. I'm sure it's better in the class. It came 34th overall, but better than that, It was then driven to Villa d'Este, where it won the award for the most beautiful sports car. So here it is, after 70 years, the 1949 Ferrari 166mm back at Villa d'Este once again. Having been here, I think, in 2000, if I remember correctly, when you and I were here for the first time. God, time flies. We had more hair. Thank you very much. Good to see you both. And when it goes by, have a look at the dashboard of this car. You'll be amazed just how simple it is. Babette, nice to see you. Now, if you thought that was delicate, look how brutal this is in comparison. Of course, the black color makes it more menacing as well. This is the big brother of the Ferrari 166 that you just saw. Whereas that was a dainty little 2-litre car, this is double the size of the engine. Once again, notice how it's right-hand drive. That doesn't mean that it was sold new to England. It's just the way that all luxury cars were in Europe after the war. And everybody has their theory as to why. Some people say it's a throwback to the days of horses and carriages when if you whipped somebody by mistake when you were riding the carriage, you wouldn't hit a pedestrian. Others say it's because you were closer to the side of a precipice, so you could position the car better. But either way, luxury cars in that day, including all early Ferraris, were right-hand drive. This particular car was sold new to Belgium. It was very much a competition car. If you look at the side windows in plexiglass, in plastic, the smooth flush, Lorenzo's just pointing out, look at these dagger-type door handles. You push the button and then the handle is revealed. You've got this enormous great fuel filler at the back, so when you come into the pits, open it up, huge great fuel drum goes in, and away you go. Plus, of course, the spare wheel right there in the back for easy access when you're taking part in rallies. Also, take a look if you can, I know it's not easy, the inside of that door is all drilled like a piece of Swiss cheese to make it as light as possible. Nothing superfluous in this car. Very basic, very fast, and very scary. Thank you very much. Mark Rollinger from Luxembourg with the Ferrari 340 America by Touring of Milan. Do you need a push? The BMW service team to the rescue as always. God, it's bloody heavy. Right, that's their problem now. Why can't Oscars need pushes instead of Ferrari 340s? Kimura-san from Japan, welcome, good afternoon. God, lucky. That was lucky. Right, I'm not going to push you after that. Now, the Maserati brothers sold their company in the late 1940s to Adolfo's grandfather, Mr. Orsi. And their contract said that they couldn't make cars called Maserati afterwards. So what do? They started immediately making their own cars with another name, Oscar. Officine Specializzate Costruzioni Automobili. And as you can see from the bonnet, it's got Oscar written on it with underneath Fratelli Maserati Bologna, which obviously tells you it was the Maserati brothers in Bologna. And rather than competing directly with Maserati, which was by that stage also racing in the bigger formulas, Formula One for example, the Maserati brothers as Oscar focused much more on small little cars like this MT4. And MT stands for Maserati Tipo, and the 4 is for the number of cylinders. But this was exactly the sort of car, there's a lot of bandside going on, this was exactly the sort of car that Italian and American racing drivers would buy to go and race on the typical airfield events that were so popular in the 1950s. 79 of these cars were made in total, and Ralph Huber is just handing over the award. great to see this car as well on the tour the other day. You look like you are having a lot of fun. E questa è la macchina perfetta per il tour l'altro giorno. It's slightly mad when a Brit and a Japanese have to speak to each other in Italian because it's the only language we speak in common. Comunque complimenti, and Kimura-san is also the organizer of a beautiful event in Kyoto. Grazie, right. Are you awarding? You'll do it later, okay. Away you go. A movie producer called William David in San Francisco was the first owner of this car. I'm so glad it's light. Pushy, 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 pushy. It never does that when nobody's watching. Thank you. Look, no hands. Guido Artom at the wheel of the Oscar MT4 of Jack and Kingsley Crowell. Lo vuoi spegnere? Ecco, già fatto. Now this is very much the same, it's interesting, what we wanted to show here is how the same chassis underneath can change depending on what the owner wants. And the first owner of this car, believe it or not, was just 16 years old when he bought and raced it. He must have had either very indulgent parents or a very successful newspaper round on his bicycle. But he was based in Los Angeles. He bought this car and raced it for 3 years. He later on became a TV actor, a photographer, and even a producer. There are some interesting fun details on this car. If you look on this side, for example, they've got an extra air scoop because the first owner wrote that otherwise, the way it was designed, the car fried the racing driver's feet. But this particular car was bodied by Moretti, who are a small coach builder in Ferrari, and you can see, which is quite surprising for a competition car, that they go to the trouble of making a beautiful handmade chrome badge for the side. But very streamlined, more streamlined than the last one, single screen, with this removable tonneau that you could put on when you weren't carrying a passenger. Beautifully restored, and still with original dealer Ernie McAfee's sticker on the side. Grazie, complimenti. E ringrazia Jack per noi anche. It'll be running on 4 by tomorrow, I'm sure. Can you come a bit further forwards, maybe? Just a little bit? Not easy to hear inside of the more panel. That's perfect. Thank you very much. Best Preserved Post-War Prize. Congratulations, you've won the compliment. Vous avez gagné le prix pour la voiture mieux préservée des après-guerre. Félicitations et compliment à votre père aussi. Je sais qu'il est rentré à Paris, mais je l'ai suivi sur le tour l'autre jour et ça c'était une expérience. Yes, if you'd like, si vous voulez sortir pour prendre le prix, parce que Dominique va vous donner le prix. Il presidente dell'ASI, Alberto Scuro, buongiorno presidente, che premia al figlio del proprietario Frédéric Leroux per la Panhard. I followed this car on the tour the other day, and I have to say, watching a car intended to do 200 kilometers an hour on the straights of Le Mans try to navigate hairpin bends above Lake Como was very entertaining. I'm glad I wasn't in it. It was about 30 degrees outside, probably about 50 inside. As you can see, very few opening panels on this car. But the whole idea behind this car was to try and extract the absolute maximum speed from the absolute minimum in terms of size of engine. This little car has an engine which today is smaller than many motorcycles. And yet, at Le Mans in 1964, it did 225 kilometers an hour before going bang. But it's an extraordinary car primarily because, as you can see from the bodywork, it's completely designed in the wind tunnel at the famous Sema wind tunnel just outside of Paris, where later on Porsche helped to design or develop their 917. These fins are to give it directional stability, and the CD, the drag coefficient of this car, is just 0.12, which is one of the lowest drag coefficients of any road legal car in history, even 50 years later. So quite an achievement. They simply did not have enough money to develop the car, and that's why the mechanicals were never quite up to the advanced specification of the bodywork. But it's a fascinating glimpse into how one team at the time interpreted the rules and made what was nonetheless an absolutely groundbreaking racing car.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous laisser partir. Et je vais dire, le tableau de bord est exceptionnel. Aussi, on dirait d'être dans un avion.
Look at the dashboard when this car goes by, because it looks like a 1930s or 40s aircraft. It really is quite something. The Panhard Le Mans car. It looks rather like a fish from the back, doesn't it? All the way from Chicago, David McNeil with the Ferrari 275 GTV Jeep. The C is the important part of the title of this car because it stands, of course, for Competizione. Now this is the car that Ferrari would sell you in 1966 if you were very lucky and very wealthy, as the successor to the 250 GTO that had stopped racing a couple of years before. This looks superficially similar to the gold, the hazelnut colored 275 Ferrari that you saw before. But under the skin, it is a completely different car. This really is a rule-cheating car because, yes, it's built to look like the car that a lawyer or successful businessman could buy to drive on the road. But if you tap that bodywork and do it very, very gently, you'll realize that it's absolutely paper thin. For the GT rules at the time, a car had to look like the car that you could go and buy and drive on the road. They didn't say anything about what material you made the bodywork out of. So absolutely paper thin bodywork. These bumpers, don't even want to put your foot on the bumper, let alone hit anything with it, because it would bend. It's again absolutely paper thin. The clue that tells you that this is a competition car is this hatch on the front wing of the car. That's when you came into the pits. It could be opened up very quickly to top up the oil without having to open up the bonnet. And this detail here, this guttering, which normally stops there, and on this car goes all the way back, is to hide the seam in the aluminum body, because the normal cars, as I say, were steel. You can tell from the sound of the engine that it's not just a normal road-going Ferrari 275. And this particular car was sold new to a Roman gentleman driver, hence the Roma plates. Renzo Sinibaldi, I think he was, raced successfully in various hill climbs, and then in later life enjoyed a very restful retirement in the States, in company of a 250 GTO next to it. Thanks, I won't. I'll let you do it. You're driving.
and you win a special award for tomorrow, David. We won't give it to you today, it's still drying out. The most iconic car, the Vrenken Pommery Trophy. Most iconic car. Congratulations, it lives back home next to a 250 GTO, so retirement for this old Ferrari isn't too shabby. Well done. Thank you, David. In the world, and one of them is here at BMW. Class H, daring to dream concepts which rocked the motoring world. And it's none other than Philip Sarabim with the irrepressible Richard Dickey as copiloto. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Now, I know not to walk next to the exhaust in a light coloured suit. Can we switch it off? Oh, it's so quiet all of a sudden. Philip, good afternoon. I can't help noticing that the girlfriend has morphed into somebody with a beard. However, this is pretty extraordinary. One of Pontiac concept car, which you spent years tracking down and buying. It was owned by 3 people, is that right?
People named Bob, that's correct. It's actually a very good friend of mine, Dr. Brinker. Spent many years tracking down the Bobs and communicating with them to purchase this car.
And every time you called up, you didn't know which Bob you were speaking to.
That's correct, yes.
Am I right in thinking that the original designer of this car did it as a sort of a special ops project without official sanction, and that was Herb Adams?
That is correct. Herb bankrolled the project. It was his ultimate dream car, and he did it for himself. He was at the peak of his career, and he wasn't building it necessarily as a show car. He was building it as his ultimate dream car.
And the panel beaters were apparently 3 ex-Rolls-Royce panel beaters, known as the Beatles of Troy.
Yes, correct. The Beatles of Troy, Michigan. And he went to his friend, who was the leading NASCAR engine builder at the time, to commission a one-off 370 V8 NASCAR engine for his special hot rod project. He was a chassis and suspension expert, so he designed a completely one-off space frame chassis as well.
I gather that when Herb Adams presented this car to his boss at Pontiac on a Friday, by Monday he was without a job.
That is, I think he was given a promotion.
Yeah, a promotion known as a P45 and goodbye, don't call us. I have to say the styling reminds me very much of the Bat Alphas of the 1950s, with these wonderful, I don't know what I'm sure the designers on the other side of the car will enlighten me to the correct term, but these sort of inward curling fins. I'm sure there's a proper design. Yeah, I'm sure there's a proper design. Yeah, you'll let me have that one, won't you? Thank you. I'm let off. It looks amazing, it sounds amazing, and it's great to see 2 such flamboyant characters driving it. So well done. You always amaze us here with things at BMW. I presume this one we won't have to push this year because it seems the battery's not flat.
Yeah, this one can manage.
I'm going to stand away from that exhaust before you fire it up, Philip. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow. God bless America. Non passerai mai inosservata. Talking about cars from the future, welcome back to 1967 and the Lamborghini Marzal. Making its debut here in Italy is a car that was first shown at the Geneva Salon in 1967. bodied by Bertone, powered by Lamborghini, and owned by Albert and Rita Spies. Watch out for that door, stand back on that side please. Watch out, you stand back on that side. We do not want any decapitations this afternoon. Wow. Rita has come back as Jane Fonda in Barbarella. Rita, wait. Dominic, will you ask Rita if she can switch off the engine if she wants? What a machine. This is the car that Bertone showed at that Geneva show 52 years ago. And at the time, and by the way, we have Mr. Valentino Balboni behind the car. Ciao Valentino, sempre un piacere vederti. Lamborghini's test driver for many, many decades, and a man who is no stranger to this car. It was shown at the Geneva show in '67, and Nuccio Bertone said, it's not a concept car, it is an ideas car. And he was absolutely right, because it wasn't just a concept car. If you think it looks familiar, it's because the following year, it made it into production with minor tweaks cosmetically and quite a few more mechanically, as what became one of the most successful Lamborghinis ever built, and their first four-seater car, the Lamborghini Espada. Ferruccio Lamborghini was one of the great showmen of the motoring world. And believe it or not, despite the fact that his company was only 3 or 4 years old, he managed to persuade Prince Rainier to drive this car around the Monaco Grand Prix circuit with Princess Grace in the passenger seat, most unregal, with the transparent doors down to the bottom of the seats, to open the 1967 Monaco Grand Prix. And Winston Goodfellow was telling me earlier that Gianpaolo Dallara, the designer of the mechanics of this car, was sweating buckets, worrying that the Lamborghini was going to break down under the gaze of the world's TV crews on that inaugural lap. But it didn't. It survived. It went on to appear in various other motor shows. And then finally it went into Bertone's museum for many decades. Bertone obviously went bankrupt. The car, together with all their other cars, was auctioned here in 2013. It has been restored over the past 5 years. And this is its Italian Concorso debut post-restoration, direct from the Spies collection. Grazie Albert, grazie Rita. We have wanted so much and waited so long to see this car at Villa d'Este. I love it. Grazie. Dominic, I would close the door. Just for safety, I would close the door. Incidentally, it's basically half of a Lamborghini engine inside, 2 liters and 6 cylinders rather than 4 liters and 12. But if you look inside, you'll notice so many of the design features that were carried on to the Espada. All of those hexagonal shapes. Now, still in 1967, this is the future as imagined by Alex Tremulis, the head of the Ford Advanced Styling Studio. Now, I cannot wait to see you stop. Okay, how do you do it? Now, if you turn off this is one of the most bizarre cars we've ever had at Villa d'Este. How does it, I was about to say, as the girl might have said to the bishop, how does it stay up?
Well, it's got a gyroscope in it. It's a big flywheel, basically, that is controlled by a hydraulic system, and it balances when the sensors tell it that the car is getting out of center.
So if you switch off the engine, you're going to fall over.
Yeah, it will run for about 2 hours, and the system has a residual pressure, so we can have about 10 seconds to get the wheels down to save it. After that, it falls down.
Am I right in thinking that this was somebody's bright idea, that there was so much congestion on the road that if you made cars half as wide, you could fit twice as many onto the roads?
Yeah, it sounds good on paper, but the reality is a little bit different.
I'm dying to see it later on when you finally switch off the engine, and it stayed as a one-off, didn't it?
Yeah, it stayed, and as you can see, it didn't catch on. We're not driving two-wheel cars today.
You're not kidding. Right, I'm going to let you, this one's going to be so easy to drive through the crowd after the Lamborghini Mazda. You're going to spear through.
Yeah, it's really easy. You always have to, the people think it's so narrow, but then there's the safety arm, and so you don't want to catch some shins with it.
It's like an American interpretation of Ben-Hur's Chariot. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, do stand out because he's got these his stabilizers. It's almost like he's learning to ride a bicycle. The stabilizers do stick out quite a lot. So please make way as he comes through. All the way from the Lane Motor Museum in the US, the 1967 Gyro X. I mean, even the name's cool. Thank you very much. I was going to say, where are you going to put those? Thank you. Please step aside. I sound like I'm doing an in-flight briefing. Doors to manual and cross-check. God, I always wanted to say that. The Gyro X. Give them a round of applause. Anybody driving a car with two wheels deserves a very wobbly one, deserves a round of applause. You've got to watch that. You've got to watch it from the back. What were they thinking? From the US of A, once again, Jim Glickenhaus with the 1970 Ferrari Modelo. Howdy. I'm doing good, Jim. You obviously look like you're expecting some serious velocity with the 4-point harnesses in this car. Now, if my memory is correct, this was Pininfarina's answer to Bertone, who had stolen the show a couple of years earlier with the Carabo, and Paolo Martin at Pininfarina said, we need to show the world that we don't just make sensible sports cars, we can rock as well. And it took 2 years, I think, before their concept came to fruition in 1970, and this was the result of that 2 years of intense work on, and it seems extraordinary today, a fully blown 512S racing car chassis with a 5-litre Le Mans type V12 engine to power it. But it never ran in the period. It went on to star at the Osaka show, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Sergio Pininfarina, who had been very much against the project, saying, we don't do cars like that, when he saw the reception to this car in Osaka, he sent a telex to Paolo Martin to say, you were right, and well done for making it. But you're the man that brought it back to life.
Yes, I mean, I've been very lucky with my relationship with Pininfarina that started with Ferrari P45 that we show here, and the fantastic Dino Competizione that they allowed me to buy, and eventually, of course, Modulo, which I'm honored to be a custodian of, my wife and I, and we passed it on to our children. And the thing to me is, this is art, but art has to move. It's like a Calder mobile. It can't be stationary. So when we got the car, it had the complete engine and gearbox, except that Ferrari, being a frugal company, kept the pistons and the connecting rods. We put it back together, and it's running, and it's just a joy to drive. And And even 50 years down, it still looks very futuristic.
I think very futuristic is an understatement. You drove this car 60 miles on the road last week around Modena. You drove past the Ferrari factory. Presumably you didn't wave because there are no windows. It's 93 centimeters high. Apparently it does not get too hot inside because you've got lots of fans to keep the air flowing through. But I think one of the most bizarre elements, and if you get a chance, look at it when it goes by, the control cluster, the control panel on your right-hand side, is fashioned out of what looks like a bowling ball. Is that right?
Yes, Paolo Martin told me that he borrowed 2 bowling balls from the Fiat Executive Bowling Alley, and he cast these pieces, and he put switches in them. None of the switches did anything, of course, but Sal Baroni, who has been my friend and mechanic for over 40 years, made everything work on the car, and now the car is fully functional. And we'll have a little more, and then Meg and I will drive it to Paris.
I think it's extraordinary. 93 centimeters high. It's probably one of the most outlandish cars that we've had here at Budapest. And I think Lorenzo Ramaciotti, obviously the former head of Pininfarina, we should ask him to say a couple of words to have the head of the company that styled it here.
Well, of course, the car had already been done when I entered Pininfarina, but I was told in editor there was a big doubt about doing this car, and Paolo Martin in 1969, instead of making the holidays during the month of August, stayed in the shop alone, and he made a foam model of the modulo, cutting the foam on its own with a hot roll. When the management came back after the vacation, he found the model that he done by himself, because Paolo Martin was very skilled with the hands. And so instead of being skeptical on the sketches, they were much more reassured by the model, and they decided to make the car.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you, Jim. It's truly fantastic, and it wins the most exciting design prize awarded by Silvia Barufaldi, the editor of Auto and Design magazine. Silvia, prego.
Quindi la macchina vince il premio per il design più interessante, più eccitante, viene premiata da Silvia Barufaldi, l'editrice di Auto e Design magazine.
No, tra 2 pali, quindi non ho molto
La macchina torna in Italia per la prima volta da tantissimi anni. La macchina che ha stupito il pubblico nel lontano 1970. Design di Paolo Martin per la Pininfarina, sicuramente una delle macchine più eccitanti che abbiamo mai avuto qui a Budapest. Now we're almost there, Jim. We're going to let you take off in the spaceship and fly back to the garage, because this is the last historic car. And it's time now, therefore, to award the Coppa d'Oro Budapest for the car that the public have voted for. Now, if I can ask you all, ladies and gentlemen, the good news is it's stopped raining. The other good news is that I will soon be stopping talking. No, don't stop the car, I'm talking about me. Therefore, we are going to move to the mosaic. We're going to move to the mosaic to award the Coppa d'Oro Budapest. I can ask you to join me here with Ulrich Knitz and Danilo Zucchetti. The trophy is being ready, and we are about to give out the Coppa d'Oro Budapest, which traditionally every year is awarded to the car that you, the public, vote popular referendum as your car of the event. And here it is, the car that you voted for this year as the winner of the Coppa d'Oro Villa d'Este, the 1937 Alfa Romeo 8C 2.9 Touring Berlinetta of David and Ginny Sidoric.
Ma come faccio? Non mi posso avvicinare.
Let's give them a round of applause, please. Fresh out of restoration, first time back here in many, many decades, the Alfa Romeo 8C 2.9 Touring Berlinetta. David, Ginny, if you'd like to, if you can climb out to receive the award, Ulrich Knieps and Daniel Zucchetti have a little something for you. As we said before, if there was ever a car that epitomized automotive sculpture, this surely is it. Art Deco styling at its finest, the mechanicals underneath the bonnet live up every bit to the promise of the exterior. Brought over all the way from Beverly Hills.
Per me muovere il mio braccio è impossibile con sta macchina.
You need to turn the fan. Ulrich Knieps congratulating David and Ginny Sidoric. Daniel Zucchetti. Thanking them for bringing the car all the way from the USA and presenting it here. Oh, and Daniel even gets a kiss. Well, well done. I think nobody would disagree with that as the choice of this year's Coppa d'Oro Villa d'Este. 5 of them ever built. The fastest and most expensive car in the world in its day, and for a number of years afterwards, in fact. Restored in America after a long life between America and the UK. And best of show, Coppa d'Oro Villa d'Este at today's Concorso di Eleganza, 25th of May, 2019. My maths may be wrong, but I make that car out to be 82 years old. Not many 82-year-olds that can do 220 kilometers an hour. It's like the Hollywood red carpet. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to thank you very much for your presence this afternoon. I suspect the photographers will be here for many hours to come. That's all right, we've rented the hotel until Monday. Thank you all. Thank you to the BMW team behind the scenes. Thank you to the Villa d'Este team making everything work as smooth as clockwork here at the hotel. Thank you to all the participants and to the judges, and perhaps above all to all of you for being here today under the skies which were not necessarily on our side to start with. Thank you very much. We'll see you either tomorrow or next year. I'm going to hand the microphone to one last word to Ulrich Knieps.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here despite the rain. And I think there's one person who needs as well a big applause, which is Simon Kitson, who did it, who saved us this afternoon. Simon, you did a bloody good job. Thank you very much for this. And see you all tomorrow afternoon at Villa Erba. Thank you.
taking they taking camera out.
Everyone is in hello. That's it. It's not too heavy.
Let's take some pictures with this one.
Hello. Derek. Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Right, yes, you're done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's correct. Amazing, amazing. Congratulations. Whoever didn't have this shot. Some officials. Come on. ¿Pueden dejar close to me? Yeah, good. Now I'm the family gets together. Excellent. Perfect.
Okay. So, finish out tonight? Yeah. Oh, come on. Yes. Rain is over.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
in the front of the car.
Where's Duncan? Where's Duncan?
Duncan!
Come here. You get here too. We're getting our picture. Yes, can you use my phone? Turn that off. There we go. Come on. Get in here, Duncan.
You want to hide the car?
No.
Yeah, okay. Here we
To
go.
the left or to the right?
Right, exactly.
One, two, to the left, two to the right.
Get over here, Duncan. See, this guy knows how to do it.
Back behind the
There we go.
Get it all on.
Yeah.
Go a little bit back to the side.
Fender side. Right. Oh, see, you're good.
Enough panorama shot and have it fun. Ready, steady, action, and one more.
Couple singles. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Basista su di te.
Ciao Alessandro.
Eh?
Ciao Alessandro.
Sì.
Se non metti... Tanto doveva far partire
dai.
That was us. We did that one. So that's cool. We'll get on there twice.
If you want, we can do it.
Sure, let's do it. One job.
Ich dachte nur so.
Ma vuoi da me?
No, facciamo, devo uscire la macchina da qua, eh? No, no,
Ce la fai?
Però deve uscire la macchina però, eh? Ah, la rimettiamo sul cavalletto.
Sta per uscire la macchina.
Su questa vedete più centrale. Freddo del cazzo.
Sì, vedo.
Si chiude sta fare. Com'è andata? Abbiamo preso.
Poteva andare meglio.
Cazzo. Vabbè, ho capito, porco due. Ha grandinato, stavamo sotto, oltre la pioggia, fredda e grandine. Saltati che vuol dire? Ah, vabbè. prendere qualche macchina, sennò sono sempre gli stessi.
Bene.
Ogni tanto me ne
Grazie,
andavo,
Ale.
ogni tanto lavoravo per Gheo Gheo.
Grazie.
Ma io volevo fare quello,
Ale,
io volevo fare
Ale.
questo pezzo. Gheo.
Ale.
Che è?
Vai, qua. Prima che stai
Intanto
mangiati
volevo
già
lavorare
Luca
per
perché siamo già
Gheo.
mangiati tipo 8.
Sì, però calcola, io stavo con affare sopra, non riuscivo a prendere, cioè una merda.
Ma questi non si stringono in vita invece? Sì,
Io c'ho sta camicia qua.
Ci sono i toast qua, forse c'è un altro po' di tempo.
Sì, ci sono. No, il tè no.
Non è che la macchinettina praticamente appena ti metti 2 euro ti sta per avete preso per un coglione? No, si può un coglione.
Ma adesso vi fanno, Odinzo vi fa delle foto e vi mette
Poi
nello
ce la facciamo
studio,
una foto.
nell'entrata nello studio, sul parete di destra vi mette una foto per una.